Hello, welcome to the Calm Universe channel. Here the stories are slow, long and calm. Before we begin, take this moment while you are still awake to subscribe and like this video. In a few minutes, your mind will be traveling through distant worlds, quiet environments, and the steady rhythms of the outer solar system. Now simply settle in, close your eyes, breathe slowly, and allow your thoughts to move with an unhurried pace. Good night. In this narration, we will move toward the region of Jupiter where sunlight arrives in a weakened form, stretched across a great distance and softened by the space it travels. Among the many moons orbiting Jupiter, Europa stands out as a world defined by a surface made entirely of ice, a thin atmosphere composed mostly of oxygen, and long intervals of cold that remain unchanged through each rotation. The environment on Europa is shaped by the slow passage of time, by the limited sunlight that reaches its surface, and by the gravitational influence of Jupiter, which guides the moon through its orbit with a steady, repeating pull. As the narration settles into its rhythm, the surface of Europa can be pictured as a smooth, frozen landscape where movement occurs only through processes that unfold over long periods. The thin atmosphere does not hold heat, and it does not create wind, leaving the icy plains in a state that feels almost entirely still. The temperature remains extremely low, creating conditions where the ice maintains its strength and rigidity. Even the faint light reflected from Jupiter provides only a dim illumination, resulting in a world where shadows remain soft and diffuse. The rotation of Europa determines the length of its day and night, and each cycle follows a predictable pattern. During the day, the surface receives a small amount of warmth, but this warmth cannot accumulate. During the night, the surface releases this heat back into space in a slow and continuous manner. This cycle repeats steadily, without interruption, shaping the moon's environment with a rhythm that remains consistent through long intervals. This introduction establishes the quiet atmosphere that defines Europa and prepares the way for a closer look at how darkness settles on its surface. We will follow the gradual decline in light, the steady drop in temperature, and the predictable transition into the cold conditions that make surviving a night on Europa impossible for the human body. These processes unfold slowly, allowing the mind to rest in the stability of their patterns and the calmness of their repetition. The slow fall of darkness on Europa's frozen plains. As Europa moves through its orbit around Jupiter, the transition from day to night unfolds in a way that reflects the moon's overall stillness. The surface begins to lose the limited sunlight it receives, and this loss happens in a gradual, steady progression. Because Europa is located far from the sun, the daylight that reaches it is already faint and diffused. When this faint light begins to diminish, the change is subtle. Shadows lengthen slowly across the icy plains, and the brightness of the landscape decreases at a rate that feels almost imperceptible. The horizon becomes dim in a uniform manner, and the surface enters a stage where light and darkness blend softly before the night takes hold. The ice that covers Europa reflects a significant portion of the sunlight that reaches it. This reflectivity makes the daytime surface appear bright despite the weak sunlight. As darkness approaches, this reflective quality becomes less visible. The ice cannot maintain brightness on its own, and without sunlight, it transitions toward a muted tone. This transition is not abrupt. It follows the same slow rhythm that characterizes the temperature changes on the Moon. The surface cools gradually as it radiates heat into space, and the darkness progresses in parallel with the cooling. The thin atmosphere does nothing to delay this shift, allowing the darkness to settle evenly and predictably across the Moon. During this transition, the presence of Jupiter becomes more evident. Because Europa is tidally locked to Jupiter, one side of the Moon always faces the giant planet. As the Sun sets, the dim glow reflected from Jupiter becomes the primary source of illumination. This glow is weak compared with sunlight, but it provides a consistent, stable light that helps shape the appearance of the icy surface. The glow does not vary rapidly. It remains a calm, faint presence that reflects the steady motion of Jupiter and its clouds. The combination of fading sunlight and Jupiter's reflected light creates a slow merging of brightness and shadow, producing a transition that takes place over long intervals of time. The lack of an atmosphere capable of scattering light means that twilight on Europa is short. After the last traces of sunlight leave the surface, the landscape becomes dim almost immediately. Yet even this shift follows a predictable pattern. Darkness does not rush across the plains. It emerges naturally from the absence of scattered light, allowing the surface to settle into a low-light environment that remains consistent through the night. The ice reflects any available illumination, creating a faint glimmer in some areas, but this glimmer does not disrupt the overall stillness of the landscape. As the night deepens, the temperature continues to drop. Europa loses heat through radiation, the same process that cools objects in the vacuum of space. Without an atmosphere to provide insulation, the surface cools steadily. This cooling is not dramatic. It follows a mathematical pattern defined by the material properties of the ice and the rate at which energy escapes into space. Over several hours, the temperature settles into a stable value that remains unchanged until sunlight returns. This predictable cooling contributes to the calmness of Europa's night, reinforcing the sense of stillness that defines the environment. Jupiter continues to influence the lighting conditions throughout the night. Its reflected glow remains visible, casting a soft, diffuse illumination that highlights the smoothness of the ice. This illumination is faint, but it provides a reference point that helps maintain the perception of the horizon. The glow does not change significantly over the course of the night. Jupiter rotates at a steady rate, but the brightness of its reflected light remains almost constant. This stability contributes to the monotony of the night, creating an environment where each moment feels similar to the one before it. The surface of Europa does not respond dynamically to the change in lighting. There are no winds to reshape the snow or ice, no atmospheric waves to alter the landscape, and no biological processes to introduce movement. The environment remains static. Cracks in the ice retain their shape. Ridges and plains maintain their positions. The only changes that occur are those caused by thermal contraction, which happens slowly and uniformly. Over long intervals of time, the surface adjusts to the cold by contracting slightly, but the rate of contraction is too slow to be noticed in any immediate sense. Because Europa lies deep within Jupiter's magnetosphere, particles from the giant planet's magnetic field reach its surface. During the day, sunlight reduces the effect of these particles slightly. At night, their influence becomes more prominent, but the change is gradual rather than sudden. These particles interact with the surface ice, causing faint chemical reactions that produce low levels of oxygen. This process does not create light or heat. It simply continues at a slow, steady rate that reflects the constant presence of Jupiter's magnetic environment. Throughout the night, the landscape remains quiet. The absence of sound is complete because sound requires an atmosphere to travel, and Europa's atmosphere is too thin to carry vibrations. The silence reinforces the sensation of stillness. Every part of the environment remains in an unchanging state, with only the slow cooling and the faint glow of Jupiter providing a sense of progression. This combination of low light, steady temperature decline, and structural stability creates a night on Europa that feels prolonged and uniform. The slow fall of darkness on Europa illustrates how the moon's environment transitions through cycles without abrupt changes. Each element, from the fading sunlight to the steady cooling, contributes to a night that follows a predictable, calming pattern. This pattern becomes the foundation for understanding why survival on Europa's surface is not possible for humans. As we move into the next topic, the focus will shift toward how the lack of a substantial atmosphere affects the human body during this prolonged period of cold and stillness. Europa's airless silence and the steady loss of body heat. On Europa's surface, the absence of a substantial atmosphere creates conditions that differ greatly from anything familiar on Earth, and these conditions influence every aspect of how heat, pressure, and exposure behave. The thin layer of gas surrounding Europa is made mostly of oxygen, yet the total amount is extremely small. It does not form a breathable medium, it does not carry warmth, and it does not produce wind. Instead, it exists as a light haze of molecules drifting above the ice, molecules that do not collide frequently enough to generate weather or transfer heat. This near-vacuum environment allows energy to escape from the surface in a steady, uninterrupted flow, producing a level of cold that remains consistent throughout the long Europan night. If a human body were placed on Europa's surface, the first change would be the immediate loss of thermal stability. On Earth, air surrounding the body slows the rate of heat loss by providing a buffer between the skin and the vacuum of space. On Europa, this buffer is absent. Body heat radiates outward continuously, following physical laws that do not depend on atmospheric presence. Radiation becomes the primary method by which warmth leaves the body, and because nothing slows this process, the rate of heat loss increases steadily. This increase is not accompanied by sensation in the environment itself. The landscape remains still. The darkness remains unchanged. The heat simply moves from the body into space, following its predictable path. In addition to heat loss, pressure plays an important role in determining how the body responds to Europa's environment. Europa's surface pressure is far lower than what is needed to maintain normal bodily functions. At such low pressure, fluids on the surface of the body evaporate more readily, a process known as sublimation when applied to frozen material. Tears, saliva, and moisture on the skin would gradually transition into vapor, although this would not be accompanied by wind or sound. The evaporation would occur quietly, in a slow and continuous manner, shaped entirely by the surrounding vacuum rather than by any dynamic event. The thin atmosphere cannot resist this process, allowing moisture to escape with ease. The internal fluids of the body remain in liquid form, because the body's structural integrity and internal pressure maintain them. However, without protective gear, the surface moisture would gradually diminish. Heat loss through evaporation would contribute to the cooling already caused by radiation, creating a compounding effect that intensifies the drop in temperature. Each mechanism of heat transfer acts in a steady, measurable way, following predictable patterns determined by physical laws. These patterns remain consistent across the European night, doing nothing to disturb the stillness of the environment. Breathing would not be possible on Europa. The thin oxygen atmosphere lacks the density needed for respiration, and a human exposed directly to the surface would not receive the oxygen needed to support life. The absence of a breathable atmosphere means that oxygen cannot be accessed from the surroundings, and the lungs cannot function in such low pressure. This aspect of Europa's environment represents a fundamental barrier to survival. Yet even this barrier presents itself in a calm manner. The thin atmosphere does not roar, shift, or compress. It simply exists at a density too low to sustain life. The extreme cold on Europa creates additional challenges. During the night, temperatures fall to levels far below the threshold required for human survival. Because there is no atmosphere to distribute heat, the surface remains uniformly cold. This uniformity creates a landscape where every area follows the same slow cooling pattern. In the absence of sunlight, the surface continues releasing energy into space, and the ice remains in a stable frozen state. The cold does not feel abrasive or forceful. It is defined instead by a lack of thermal movement, a consistent environment where energy flows outward in silence. Protective equipment would be needed not only to provide oxygen and maintain pressure, but also to regulate temperature. Even with equipment, the gradual unchanging conditions would require continuous compensation. The lack of an insulating atmosphere means that thermal regulation must be entirely artificial. Heat must be generated and retained internally because the environment contributes nothing to warmth. Spacesuits designed for Earth's orbit operate in a vacuum but are not created for extremely low temperatures sustained over long intervals. Europa's night would require systems capable of counteracting continuous radiation loss, subsurface cooling, and the absence of ambient heat. In addition to the challenges faced by the body, equipment and materials also undergo gradual changes in such conditions. Metals contract at low temperatures, and electronic systems must be designed to withstand the extreme cold. Batteries operate less efficiently in environments where heat dissipates rapidly, and mechanical components become rigid. These changes occur slowly, shaped by the material properties of the equipment. They do not cause dramatic failures. Instead, they represent steady adjustments that accumulate over time, forming another layer of difficulty in maintaining survival on Europa's surface. The low-pressure environment also affects the behavior of gases released from equipment. Any released gas expands rapidly into the vacuum, dispersing in all directions until it becomes indistinguishable from the thin atmosphere. This expansion happens quietly, without turbulence or swirling motion, because the density of the surrounding environment is too low to support such patterns. Even leaks or emissions behave in a calm, steady manner, reinforcing the stillness of Europa's night. Despite these challenges, the environment remains entirely passive. Europa does not exhibit weather patterns or abrupt temperature swings. The processes involved in cooling, sublimation, pressure loss and radiation, follow steady trajectories that unfold gradually. The Moon's conditions do not actively force change. They simply create a setting where change occurs in accordance with the absence of atmospheric support. The human body, designed for an environment with higher pressure and warmer temperatures, cannot maintain its equilibrium in such conditions. Each system of the body relies on a balance that Europa does not provide. In this chapter, the focus has remained on the calm and steady nature of Europa's surface conditions. The environment does not harm through violent events or sudden shifts. Instead, it influences the body through slow, predictable processes that follow the physical properties of the vacuum and the extreme cold. As we continue to explore Europa in the next topic, we will move from the surface downward into the thick shell of ice that separates the frozen exterior from the ocean beneath it, examining how geological forces shape this layer over long intervals of time. The thick ice shell and the long geological stillness beneath it. Beneath Europa's exposed surface lies a shell of ice that extends downward for many kilometers, forming a rigid barrier between the cold exterior and the ocean hidden far below. This ice shell is shaped by a combination of temperature, pressure, and gravitational forces, and it evolves at a rate so slow that its changes cannot be observed within any human timescale. The topmost layers remain solid and brittle, responding to the extreme cold by forming a landscape composed of ridges, fractures, and smooth plains. These features appear static because the processes that create them unfold through long geological intervals, shifting only in response to steady internal stresses created by Jupiter's gravitational pull. The thickness of the ice shell varies, but scientific observations suggest that it reaches depths of several tens of kilometers in some regions. At such depths, the pressure becomes strong enough for the ice to behave differently than it does at the surface. Instead of being brittle, the deeper ice behaves more like a slow-moving solid, capable of flowing gently under the influence of internal stresses. This flow is extremely slow, progressing at rates measured across thousands or even millions of years. The result is a structure that remains stable in the short term, but gradually adjusts over long periods. From the perspective of a human observer, the ice would appear motionless, forming a frozen boundary that separates two distinct environments. Europa's ice shell is influenced by tidal forces generated by Jupiter. Because the Moon follows an elliptical orbit, the gravitational pull it experiences varies slightly during each orbit. This variation causes the Moon to flex, producing internal heat through friction within the ice and the deeper ocean. The flexing does not cause rapid or noticeable changes on the surface. Instead, it introduces long-term adjustments that accumulate gradually, creating patterns of ridges and fractures that reflect the repeated cycles of stress. These patterns appear as linear features that stretch across great distances, forming a network of lines that trace the history of Europa's geological activity. The ridges on Europa's surface are believed to form when the ice crust separates slightly and then refreezes as material from below fills the gap. This process takes place slowly and predictably. Sections of the ice move apart by very small amounts. The underlying material rises due to buoyancy, and the cold surface environment cools the material until it becomes solid again. Each ridge therefore represents a long sequence of events, rather than a single moment of activity. Because the movement is minimal within short intervals of time, the surface maintains an appearance of stillness, even as it undergoes subtle change. Fractures in the ice form in response to the same tidal forces. They appear as dark lines or bands that cut across the lighter planes, often intersecting with one another. These fractures represent areas where the ice has been stretched, compressed, or shifted slightly due to internal stresses. Their formation does not involve sudden cracking or explosive events. Instead, they widen gradually as stresses continue to influence them, remaining stable until long-term pressure changes alter their structure. The fractures do not widen continuously. They expand incrementally over long intervals, reflecting the slow rhythm of the tidal cycles. In addition to ridges and fractures, Europa's ice shell contains regions of disrupted terrain known as chaos zones. These areas consist of broken ice blocks that appear to have moved relative to one another, creating a jumbled pattern. The formation of chaos terrain is thought to involve the thinning or partial melting of the ice beneath the surface, possibly caused by localized heating. As the ice weakens, the surface shifts slightly, allowing sections to rotate or move. This process is slow and controlled, occurring over long periods. The surface blocks remain intact, and the movement does not occur abruptly. Instead, it progresses in a manner consistent with the calm, geological behavior found throughout Europa. Deeper within the ice shell, pressure and temperature increase due to the internal heat generated by tidal flexing. At these depths, the ice may transition to a softer state, capable of flowing in a way that resembles the slow movement of glaciers on Earth. The flow distributes stresses evenly, allowing the deeper layers to adjust to long-term changes in the Moon's shape. This gradual movement ensures that the ice shell remains stable and capable of supporting the surface features above. The transition between brittle and ductile ice occurs smoothly, forming a gradient where the properties of the ice shift with depth. The slow geological processes operating within Europa's ice shell contribute to the overall stillness of the surface. The environment does not undergo rapid eruptions, strong tectonic shifts, or dramatic changes. Instead, the surface evolves through patterns that repeat consistently across long intervals. The ice shell absorbs the stresses created by tidal forces and releases them through gradual adjustments. These adjustments shape the surface in quiet, predictable ways, creating an environment where movement occurs without sound, without vibration, and without noticeable change during short periods. The thickness and stability of the ice shell create a barrier that prevents direct access to the ocean below. Any attempt to reach the ocean would require penetrating many kilometers of solid ice, a task that would demand significant energy and time. Even specialized equipment would face the challenge of maintaining temperature control and structural integrity over such depths. The ice does not assist in the process. It remains strong and unyielding due to the extreme cold near the surface and the increasing pressure at greater depths. The nature of Europa's ice shell ensures that the environment remains separated into two distinct regions for long periods. Although the ice shell is influenced by gravitational forces, it retains its overall structure through the balance between internal heat and external cold. This balance creates a layered system where heat from below attempts to soften the ice, while the cold from above strengthens it. The result is a dynamic equilibrium that remains stable across long stretches of time. The shell does not collapse or melt entirely, nor does it freeze solid to the bottom. It persists in a state that reflects Europa's position in the outer solar system and its relationship with Jupiter. This chapter has provided a calm, detailed exploration of Europa's ice shell and the slow geological processes that shape it. The ice forms a stable, extensive layer that evolves at a rate too slow to perceive, maintaining an environment defined by stillness and long-term repetition. In the next topic, we will move below the ice and observe the subsurface ocean, a region kept warm by tidal forces and concealed beneath complete darkness. The subsurface ocean, a warm region hidden under complete darkness. Beneath Europa's thick shell of ice lies an ocean that remains liquid due to the slow and continuous heating produced by tidal forces within the Moon's interior. This ocean extends for many tens of kilometers and occupies a region completely isolated from sunlight. The ice above forms a barrier that prevents light from reaching the water, leaving the ocean in a state of permanent darkness. The absence of light does not imply inactivity. Instead, it establishes an environment where physical processes operate according to the predictable patterns created by pressure, temperature, and gravitational influence. Because sunlight cannot penetrate the ice, the ocean exists in a world shaped entirely by internal heating and the quiet transfer of energy from Europa's interior. The water in Europa's ocean remains warmer than the frozen surface, but this warmth is relative. The temperatures in this ocean are still low compared with any typical environment on Earth. However, they are above the freezing point due to the energy introduced by tidal flexing. As Europa moves through its orbit, Jupiter's gravity applies a varying pull on the Moon's interior. This continuous variation creates friction within the underlying rocky layer. The friction produces heat that rises slowly toward the ice above, warming the ocean from below. This process is steady, repeating itself during each orbit, and gradually distributing heat throughout the water column. The amount of heat produced remains consistent over long intervals, maintaining the ocean in a liquid state without sudden changes. The pressure in the ocean increases with depth. Near the bottom, the pressure reaches levels far greater than those found in Earth's deepest trenches. This pressure influences the behavior of the water, making it denser and affecting how internal currents move. These currents travel slowly, shaped by the distribution of heat and the rotation of Europa. The rotation creates forces that guide the water in long, sweeping motions, allowing the ocean to maintain circulation patterns that persist over extended periods. These movements occur without turbulence or rapid shifts. Their pace reflects the calm environment in which they operate, creating slow and continuous flows that distribute heat across the entire ocean. The rocky seafloor beneath the ocean provides another important source of interaction. It contains materials that respond to the tidal forces generated by Jupiter's gravity. As the rock flexes, it warms, releasing heat into the water. This heating is not strong enough to create distinct thermal gradients within short periods. Instead, it establishes a long-term temperature structure that remains stable. The heat introduced at the seafloor is carried upward by the slow-moving currents. Because the ocean lacks light-driven processes, its structure depends entirely on internal heating and gravitational influence. These factors ensure that the ocean behaves predictably, maintaining calm conditions throughout its vast volume. The boundary between the ocean and the ice above represents a region where processes occur at an extremely slow rate. The ice that forms this boundary is kept at a temperature near its melting point. This results in a constant but gentle exchange of energy between the water and the ice. Heat from the ocean moves upward, softening the underside of the ice, while the surface cold penetrates downward, maintaining the integrity of the shell. This balance remains stable over long stretches of time. In some areas, the ice may become thin enough for pockets of warmer water to rise, creating regions where the boundary shifts slightly. These shifts do not occur suddenly. They are guided by the slow patterns of temperature and pressure that dominate the environment. The absence of light means that the ocean has no direct connection to the variations in sunlight that influence other planetary environments. Instead, it operates in a state of uninterrupted darkness. This darkness does not change during Europa's day or night cycle. It remains constant, shaping the ocean as a place where the lack of external illumination allows internal processes to dominate. The darkness adds to the sense of isolation, creating a world where motion occurs solely due to physical laws rather than external energy. This uniformity contributes to the calmness that defines the ocean. As the ocean extends upward toward the underside of the ice, the water gradually transitions into a region where ice begins to form. At certain depths, the temperature and pressure conditions allow the creation of different phases of ice, some of which behave differently than the ice found at the surface. These forms of ice can be denser and more structured, influenced by the immense pressure of the water above. The transition between water and ice does not occur abruptly. It takes place through a series of small changes in temperature and density, forming a complex boundary layer that adjusts slowly as conditions change. Although the ocean is hidden, scientific observations suggest that it contains salts and minerals carried from the rocky seafloor. These substances influence the freezing point of the water, allowing the ocean to remain liquid at slightly lower temperatures. The distribution of minerals is guided by the ocean's slow currents, creating a stable chemical structure that remains consistent over long periods. The interaction between minerals, heat, and pressure forms a long-standing system that behaves predictably, contributing to the overall equilibrium of the ocean. The environment of Europa's ocean is entirely shaped by the interplay between gravitational forces, internal heating, and the insulating properties of the ice shell. These factors work together to maintain calm conditions that persist for long ages. Nothing within the ocean changes rapidly. Currents follow their paths at speeds determined by the moon's rotation and internal temperature distribution. Heat rises toward the ice at a controlled pace. The water maintains stability through pressure and density, creating a deep, quiet environment that reflects the same slow rhythm found throughout the rest of Europa. This chapter has described the calm and gradual processes that keep Europa's ocean in a liquid state, hidden beneath a thick layer of ice and shaped entirely by internal heating. In the next topic, we will move outward again, observing how Jupiter's gravitational influence creates long-term rhythmic cycles across the entire moon, affecting both the ice shell and the ocean below it in slow, predictable ways. Jupiter's constant pull, tidal rhythm across the entire moon. Europa's position within Jupiter's gravitational field places it in a setting where the forces acting upon it follow a steady and predictable pattern. Jupiter's mass is enormous compared with Europa's, and the gravitational pull created by this mass extends far into space, influencing the moon during every moment of its orbit. As Europa moves along its path, the strength of Jupiter's pull changes slightly, depending on Europa's distance from the planet. These variations occur with each orbit, generating a continuous cycle of stretching and compressing that shapes the moon's interior and contributes to its thermal structure. This process, known as tidal flexing, operates at a pace that reflects the slow orbital motion of the moon, creating changes that accumulate over long intervals without introducing sudden shifts. The tidal forces applied by Jupiter act on Europa's ice shell, its subsurface ocean, and its rocky interior. The ice shell responds by experiencing gentle flexing that influences its shape over time. This flexing is not noticeable in the short term. It does not create abrupt movements or visible distortions. Instead, it produces small adjustments that repeat consistently with each orbit, gradually shaping the network of ridges, fractures, and planes observed on the surface. These features emerge over thousands or millions of years, forming patterns that reflect the long-term rhythm established by Jupiter's gravitational influence. The subsurface ocean also responds to the tidal forces. As the moon stretches and compresses, the water within the ocean moves slightly in response to the shifting pressure. These movements help maintain circulation patterns that distribute heat throughout the ocean. The circulation does not occur rapidly because the forces involved act over large distances and the ocean's density resists abrupt motion. Instead, the water flows in slow, controlled pathways that remain stable across long periods. The tidal rhythm ensures that the ocean receives a steady supply of internal heat, allowing it to remain liquid despite the extreme cold found at Europa's surface. In the rocky interior of Europa, the tidal forces create friction. This friction occurs as the rock bends and shifts in response to Jupiter's gravitational pull. Although the movements are small, they produce enough heat to warm the surrounding material. The heat then travels outward, contributing to the warmth of the subsurface ocean. This process is continuous and does not involve eruptions or sudden geological events. Instead, the heat production remains stable, providing a long-term source of energy that helps maintain the ocean in its liquid state. The interaction between gravitational pull and internal heating creates a cycle that preserves Europa's structure and maintains its thermal balance. The gravitational relationship between Europa and Jupiter is also affected by the presence of other moons in the system, particularly Io and Ganymede. These moons contribute to the orbital resonance that maintains Europa's eccentric orbit. Because the orbit is not a perfect circle, Europa's distance from Jupiter changes slightly during each rotation. These changes ensure that tidal flexing continues indefinitely. The resonance prevents Europa's orbit from becoming circular and losing the variation needed to generate internal heat. This interaction among the moons creates a stable configuration in which tidal forces remain active over long time frames. The rhythm of tidal forces shapes Europa's day and night cycles as well. The moon is tidally locked, meaning that one side always faces Jupiter. As Europa orbits the planet, the same hemisphere remains oriented toward the giant world, while the opposite hemisphere faces away. This alignment creates predictable patterns in how Europa experiences illumination, gravitational force, and internal stress. These patterns repeat with each orbit, producing a cycle that remains consistent through long intervals of time. The gravitational pull of Jupiter influences not only the physical structure of Europa, but also the distribution of energy across the moon. The side facing Jupiter experiences slightly stronger flexing due to the proximity to the gravitational source. The far side experiences slightly weaker flexing. This difference contributes to variations in heat generation, although the variations remain small and unfold over extended periods. The differences are not strong enough to create unstable conditions. Instead, they contribute to the overall balance of Europa's interior, maintaining conditions that repeat consistently. The tidal rhythm also affects the behavior of the ice near the surface. As Europa flexes, the ice undergoes stress that contributes to the formation and widening of fractures. These fractures may open slightly during certain parts of the orbit and close again during others. The changes are subtle, occurring at rates that are not perceivable within a single Europan day. Over long periods, these repeated adjustments create recognizable patterns in the ice, forming linear features that extend across large regions. The slow pace of these changes ensures that the surface remains calm and stable during any short period. The gravitational influence of Jupiter creates a sense of continuity across Europa's environment. Each part of the Moon responds to the forces in a way that reflects its physical properties. The rocky interior warms through friction. The ocean circulates in response to pressure differences. The ice shell adjusts to stress by forming subtle structural features. All these processes operate in harmony with the tidal rhythm, following predictable cycles that maintain the Moon's long-term stability. This harmony creates an environment where nothing shifts suddenly, and where each change builds upon the previous one in a steady progression. In the outer regions of space surrounding Europa, Jupiter dominates the environment visually as well as gravitationally. Its large size and reflective clouds make it a constant presence in the sky. From Europa's surface, Jupiter appears as a wide, steady object that does not change quickly. Its movement across the sky follows predictable paths determined by Europa's orbital position. This visual consistency mirrors the gravitational consistency experienced by Europa, reinforcing the calm and repetitive nature of the environment. This chapter has described how Jupiter's gravitational influence shapes Europa through long-term cycles of pressure, heating, and structural adjustment. These tidal forces operate continuously, maintaining the conditions that define the Moon's surface, ocean, and interior. In the next topic, we will guide the narration back to the frozen surface and observe the long Europan night as it progresses toward dawn, exploring how sunlight returns gradually and how the icy landscape responds to the slow arrival of light. The long Europan night and the return of dim sunlight. As Europa continues its orbit around Jupiter, the long night on its surface progresses with the same steady rhythm that governs every aspect of the Moon's environment. Once darkness has fully settled, the landscape remains in a state where illumination comes only from the faint glow reflected by Jupiter. This glow provides a soft, diffuse light that maintains a minimal level of visibility across the ice. The light does not fluctuate rapidly because Jupiter's reflective clouds present a consistent appearance from this distance. The surface therefore spends much of the night in an environment that appears dim but uniform, shaped by the absence of direct sunlight and the presence of a stable, distant reflection. During the long Europan night, the temperature across the surface continues to decline at a steady rate. Without an atmosphere capable of storing heat, the ice releases thermal energy directly into space. This cooling process slows gradually as the temperature approaches a stable equilibrium point determined by the balance between radiation loss and the near absolute cold of the surrounding vacuum. The ice does not undergo sudden contraction or expansion. Instead, it adjusts slowly, responding to temperature changes through minor structural shifts that take place over extended intervals. These adjustments maintain the surface in a calm and rigid state throughout the night. Jupiter's position in the sky changes gradually during Europa's rotation, creating subtle variations in the angle at which its reflected light reaches the surface. These variations do not produce strong shadows or sharp contrasts. Instead, they create a gentle progression of brightness that moves slowly across the icy plains. The changes occur at a pace too slow to perceive moment by moment. They contribute to the sense that the night is a continuous period, rather than a sequence of distinct moments. The icy landscape remains consistently illuminated by Jupiter's reflection, and the overall level of light does not shift abruptly. As Europa rotates, some regions of the surface gradually begin to orient themselves toward the direction where sunlight will eventually return. This transition occurs long before the first rays of sunlight reach the surface. The approach of dawn can be understood through the orientation of the moon, rather than through any visible cue. The sky remains dark, and the surface remains cold. Yet the slow movement of Europa through its orbit ensures that daylight will eventually reach the ice once more. The arrival of sunlight is predetermined by the moon's orbital position and rotation, and these processes unfold at a steady and predictable pace. Eventually, faint indications of sunlight begin to appear along the horizon. These indications are extremely subtle because the sunlight that reaches Europa is significantly weaker than the sunlight that reaches Earth. The light must travel across a much greater distance, and the intensity decreases as a result. When the first traces of sunlight touch the surface, the ice responds with a slight increase in brightness. This increase occurs gradually, mirroring the slow arrival of the light itself. There are no sharp distinctions between night and day. Instead, the boundary between darkness and illumination forms a gradual transition shaped by the nature of distant sunlight. During the initial stage of sunrise, the sunlight interacts with the icy landscape by reflecting from the surface. Europa's ice is highly reflective, a characteristic that contributes to its relatively bright appearance when illuminated. As more sunlight reaches the surface, the brightness increases uniformly, maintaining the same calm visual quality that defines the moon's environment. The surface does not warm rapidly in response to the sunlight. The thin atmosphere cannot retain heat, and the ice releases energy as quickly as it receives it. The warming therefore occurs at a slow and controlled pace, preventing any abrupt temperature changes. As dawn progresses, the ice begins to respond to the slight warming in subtle ways. The uppermost layers might undergo minor thermal adjustments, but these adjustments remain too small to observe directly. The surface retains its structural integrity because the overall temperature remains extremely low. Any changes that do occur take place across long periods, shaped by the consistent and predictable interaction between the ice and the arriving sunlight. The appearance of the landscape remains stable, and the patterns of ridges, fractures, and plains remain unchanged. Jupiter's reflection continues to contribute to the illumination even as sunlight becomes more prominent. The combination of direct sunlight and reflected light creates a soft, layered brightness across the surface. These two sources of light interact without disrupting the calm appearance of the moon. The brightness increases gradually as Europa continues rotating, and the transition from night to day becomes complete once the sunlight fully illuminates the icy plains. There is no dramatic shift as this happens. The surface transitions into daylight through a slow accumulation of light that mirrors the way night arrived earlier. The return of sunlight marks the conclusion of the European night, but it does not introduce instability or rapid change. The surface remains cold, the ice remains solid, and the environment continues to follow its long-term patterns without interruption. The new day on Europa resembles the one before it, characterized by a consistent presence of light that remains subdued compared with sunlight on Earth. The day will progress toward another gradual sunset, beginning the cycle once more. Each cycle reinforces the stability of the environment, which remains defined by long intervals, predictable changes, and an absence of sudden events. This chapter has guided the narration from the depths of the long European night toward the slow and steady return of sunlight. The environment on Europa follows cycles shaped by distance from the sun, the absence of a substantial atmosphere, and the influence of Jupiter's gravitational field. As the next and final topic approaches, the focus will shift outward to place Europa within the broader context of the outer solar system, exploring how its quiet characteristics resemble those of other moons that exist far from the sun. Europa in the context of the outer solar system's quiet worlds. Europa occupies a position within the outer solar system where sunlight is weak, temperatures are low, and geological processes unfold across spans of time that extend far beyond human perception. In this distant region, many moons share characteristics shaped by similar environmental conditions. These characteristics include ice-covered surfaces, slow rotational cycles, thin or nearly absent atmospheres, and interactions with the gravitational fields of giant planets. Europa is one example of these quiet worlds, and placing it in the broader context of the outer solar system reveals patterns that help explain the consistency and stillness found across many of these environments. The moons orbiting Jupiter, Saturn, Uranus, and Neptune experience light that reaches them only after traveling a long distance from the sun. Because of this distance, the sunlight arriving at their surfaces is significantly weaker than sunlight on Earth. The reduced intensity creates conditions where surface temperatures remain low and where environments transition slowly between day and night. On Europa, the weak sunlight contributes to the long, gradual cooling and warming cycles that define each rotation. Similar patterns occur on many other moons, where light arrives in a diffused form that cannot create rapid heating or produce sharp changes in surface conditions. The result is a collection of worlds that share a calm, steady connection to distant sunlight. Another shared characteristic among the icy moons of the outer solar system is the presence of solid surfaces dominated by frozen water and other volatiles. Europa's smooth, reflective ice shell is echoed by surfaces found on moons such as Enceladus, Tethys, and Rhea around Saturn, and Ariel and Titania around Uranus. These surfaces form through processes related to freezing, expansion, and long-term exposure to low temperatures. They remain stable because the energy available to shape them is limited. The cold environments prevent rapid melting, erosion, or atmospheric weathering, allowing the landscapes to retain features that persist for very long periods. The surfaces become records of slow geological change, shaped by internal processes such as tidal flexing, rather than external forces such as wind or liquid flow. The thin or absent atmospheres common in this region also contribute to the quiet nature of these worlds. Europa's atmosphere, composed primarily of sparse oxygen molecules, does not interact strongly with the surface. It does not form clouds, winds, or weather patterns. Similar atmospheres exist on other moons, where gases escape quickly into space or remain at densities too low to influence surface conditions. The lack of atmospheric activity suppresses short-term environmental variation, leaving the surfaces to evolve through internal forces or impacts from space. The result is a collection of worlds where change occurs without the rapid cycles seen on planets with denser atmospheres. Many of the icy moons, including Europa, interact strongly with the gravitational fields of their parent planets. These interactions generate tidal forces that reshape their interiors and, in some cases, create sources of internal heat. On Europa, Jupiter's gravitational pull produces slow flexing within the moon's rocky core and ice shell. The flexing generates heat that maintains the subsurface ocean beneath the ice. Similar processes can be found on moons such as Enceladus, where Saturn's gravity contributes to subsurface heating that drives geysers at the moon's south pole. Although these geysers represent active phenomena, the underlying forces remain tied to long-term patterns of tidal interaction. The heating occurs gradually and maintains stability within the moon over extended intervals. The presence of subsurface oceans beneath ice shells is a notable pattern among several moons in the outer solar system. Europa's ocean is one example of this hidden layer, and moons such as Ganymede, Callisto, Enceladus and Titan are also believed to possess liquid water beneath their surfaces. These oceans exist because internal heating prevents the water from freezing solid. The insulating ice shells above help maintain a balance between internal warmth and external cold. The oceans remain in darkness, isolated from sunlight, and their conditions depend entirely on internal geological processes. The stability of these oceans reflects the calm energy inputs and predictable rhythms of the environments in which they exist. Europa's long-term thermal stability mirrors the stability found in other icy moons. The limited energy available from both sunlight and internal heating ensures that changes in temperature occur slowly. This slow progression prevents rapid modifications to surface features or internal structures. The cold environments maintain their form, reinforcing the calmness that defines many of these distant worlds. The ice shells, oceans, and rocky interiors function together as systems where each component evolves according to the steady influences of gravity, heat, and energy distribution. Impact craters offer additional evidence of the slow processes that shape the outer solar system. Many moons in this region display surfaces covered with craters that remain preserved for long periods due to the absence of atmospheric weathering. Europa, however, displays relatively few craters, a sign that its surface is reshaped gradually by internal processes over geological timescales. Other moons with more static surfaces retain craters from impacts that occurred long ago. The preservation of these craters highlights the stability of the environments in which they exist, environments that do not erase or alter features quickly. When Europa is viewed alongside these other moons, a pattern emerges. The outer solar system is home to many bodies that share characteristics shaped by distance from the Sun, gravitational interactions with giant planets, and limited sources of energy. These worlds evolve through slow, steady processes rather than through rapid or dramatic events. They provide examples of environments where time stretches into long sequences of gradual change and where quiet conditions dominate day after day and night after night. Europa fits into this group by displaying the hallmarks of an icy moon, shaped by internal heating, tidal forces, and a distant position in the solar system. Its environment reflects the broader patterns found among the outer moons, offering insight into how cold, distant worlds maintain stability across long intervals. The stillness of Europa's surface, the hidden ocean beneath its ice, and the consistent pull of Jupiter all contribute to its identity as one of the solar system's quietest environments. This final chapter concludes the journey through Europa and its environment by placing the Moon within the larger family of outer solar system worlds. These distant environments share rhythms defined by slow movement, low temperatures, and long-term geological behavior. As the narration returns to stillness, the environment around Europa continues its cycles without interruption, repeating patterns shaped by gravity, distance, and time.